Mr. Keeney, whom we've spoken about throughout this trial. He indicated to us in that message that he had seen on the news or in reports about some text messages that had been provided. He then went and looked at his phone and found some text messages apparently between he and Mr. Blitzer. We reached out to him this morning and had him try to get us those. The trouble being he was not going to be able to email them to us in a timely fashion, so we had him take screenshots and they're being converted. That's where Ms. Culpa is now, trying to convert all of those and get them printed so that we can provide them to Mr. Bradsher as soon as we can. I understand, and as I've told him, since they relate to Mr. Blitzer, my goal was to get them to him this morning so that he would have time to review them while Mr. Blitzer is on the stand if he wishes to question him about them in any way. But she's doing her best to get them done. I just don't know how quickly it's going to happen. I don't imagine it's going to take an incredibly long time from here. She's been working on it for about 35 minutes or so. So I don't know how Your Honor wants to do that as far as giving Mr. Bradsher the ability to use that. But
all right. Well, Mr. Bradsher.
Yes, Your Honor, I would appreciate it if I could have 30 minutes before I resume cross to review those, because and I talked to the prosecutor beforehand, he is aware of the issues raised in the Keeney statements, and to follow a path that I had planned without reviewing these texts, knowing that there are more, I just would like 30 minutes. I'm not asking for a delay longer than that, but I think it would be important for me to review those texts in the context of his two previous statements before I elicit questions from Mr. Blitzer. And I will tell the court a general forecast. I do intend to give the jurors the affidavit. I don't intend to go through every paragraph, but I had intended to do that at the end. I had planned to address the Keeney issue and clean up a couple of chronological issues, and then I'm going to be done. So I would like a little latitude for that. Thank you.
Okay, so that's important. Just that you gave me a forecast of the time remaining with this witness on cross. So it sounds like that sometime this morning you would anticipate wrapping up with this witness?
Coming into this morning, I thought an hour I would be done.
All right.
But
okay, then it also sounds like you don't have other subject matters that you can take up with this witness, or at least significant other blocks of time that you can take up other than Keeney. Is that? I'm just wondering.
Other than the affidavit, which I wanted to conclude with.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's fine. Why don't we just inform the jurors then? If there's no objection, I'll just have the bailiff let the jurors know that we're going to need until 10:15. I'll ask them to come back at 10:15, and hopefully Ms. Culpa can at least have a set for Mr. Bradsher to review in the next, say, 10 minutes.
we can at least certainly give him a partial set fairly quickly, but I think we should have the entirety done.
So let's do that. If there's no objection, I'll just have the bailiff ask the jurors to be at ease until 10:15. They can go have a cup of coffee, but just return to the deliberation room at 10:15. And then we'll just be at ease until that time.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Hopefully that'll be enough time to get everything reviewed.
No objection to that, Your Honor.
All right, very good. You can stand down, sir. All right, so we'll be at ease. Bailiff, if you'll let the jurors know, and we'll be at ease until 10:15.
Yes, Court at ease at 10:15.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. I apologize for the delay. As I mentioned in the introductory remarks, there, from time to time, matters come up that require our consideration outside the presence of the jury, but I believe we're now ready to proceed with further cross-examination of this witness. Mr. Blitzer, do you recognize you're still under oath?
yes, sir.
Very good. Mr. Bradsher?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Blitzer, yesterday we were talking about the sequence of events, and you mentioned that you met with Tom Ford, who was the special prosecutor in this case until a couple of weeks ago. Is that right?
He was the special prosecutor when?
A couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Okay. Now, during that meeting, you had indicated that you learned for the first time that Jason Ramey was the initial complainant in this SBI investigation. Is that right?
I think so.
Okay. Do you recall whether or not you learned that in December 2015, the allegation from Mr. Ramey?
Who was making the claim, allegation?
Or the nature of the claim as of December 2015?
December 2015, I knew the nature of the claim was Pam Bradsher coming to, had Pam Bradsher been going to work before August, and was Cindy going to work, but I didn't know who.
All right. So at that time, December of 2015, isn't it true, Pam had not worked for you for over a year, and according to your testimony the last couple of days, Cindy Blitzer was working the hours that she was putting in Beacon. Is that right?
Half right. Pam Bradsher hadn't worked for 4 months, not over a year.
Okay.
She resigned August of 15. You're asking me about December of 15.
I actually asked him about December of, 2015, 4 months.
Right?
Okay. So,
And yes to the second part of your question.
all right. So for 4 months, Pam Bradsher hadn't been working for you, and Tyler Henderson had.
Roughly, yes.
Okay. And Jason Ramey had worked with Pam Bradsher. You had observed DWI's conflict cases, things like
I'm
that?
sure they did, yeah.
All right. So Mr. Ramey did have interaction working with Pam at the Rockingham office. Is that right?
I'm sure they did.
Okay. Now, the initial interview, Agent Mays has testified already, starts April 6th of 2016. Do you have any personal knowledge as to what happened between December of 2015 until April of 2016 with regards to this investigation?
None that I can think of.
All right. But you don't have any personal knowledge either, is that correct?
No, that's what I just said, none that I can think of.
All right. So when you said yesterday you were notified or got some information that there was an SBI investigation, that was ironically also December of 2015, is that right?
Yes,
Okay, so along the same time that Jason Ramey would have made that complaint, is that right?
I don't know when Jason Ramey made the complaint.
Okay.
You're saying it was April of 2016. I don't know.
All right, well, let me ask you this for the jury. Did you ever get any other information, starting chronologically from December of 2015, that there was an SBI investigation ongoing?
I had a lawyer in Rockingham County, I think sometime in July, maybe August of 16, tell me that he had someone tell him that he had heard the same thing, that there was an investigation going on.
Okay? And then the next information with regards to the investigation would be Tyler Henderson coming and telling you.
Yes, sir.
All right. And yesterday you recounted that you were specifically told that Agent Whitley had interviewed me. Is that right?
I don't know what you mean.
Okay, well, in explaining why you went and got a lawyer, and when Mr. Whitley called you, you knew who he was, you had said that that information was given to you.
I think Tyler Henderson, or even perhaps you, might have told me that interviews were being conducted, or that someone interviewed you, or at least someone in your office, but I certainly knew at that point, based on my communication with Tyler Henderson, that the allegations that I had been hearing were true.
Okay. So my interview was September 6th. Does that put in context any time with you?
September 6th of 16?
Yes.
I mean, context in regard to what?
Do you recall when Tyler Henderson came and saw you?
I've told you 1,000 times, very late August to early September is my best recollection.
All right. And you've also answered that you thereafter called Mr. Grace. Is that right?
I think I called Mr. Grace after Agent Whitley and I exchanged a couple. I didn't initially know when I got Agent Whitley's voicemail that it was about that matter. I was still the sitting DA. I thought it could have been an unrelated matter and just a coincidence. But after a couple voicemails, I realized that it was about that and then directed Mike to call Agent Whitley.
So then Agent Whitley called you, is that right?
Yes, we exchanged some voicemails.
And then you contacted your lawyer, Mr. Grace,
Yes,
and then you asked him to go talk to your office, is that right?
I don't know if it was my idea or Mike's idea, but yes, to go tell my staff that they were free. They were going to be asked to be interviewed and they could talk or not talk. It was their choice.
All right. Well, yesterday, I asked you that question, or maybe the prosecutor did. You said that you told them to go cooperate.
No, I told you that I never spoke to my staff,
Okay,
that I told you that Mike Grace went,
right.
that
And
I arranged a morning meeting that they thought I would be at, but I was not at. Mike went.
And isn't it true, I asked you, what did you tell Mr. Grace to say? And you said you don't tell Mike Grace anything.
That's correct.
Okay. And I asked you if you knew what he told the staff, and you said no, right?
I thought I said that he told them it was their choice. They could give interviews or they could not give interviews, but there'd be no repercussions if they did as far as their employment was concerned, and nobody could compel them to or not to.
So you sent a text that said mandatory staff meeting, is that correct?
I don't know if it was text or email, but I guess.
Well, Mark Keeney was your right-hand person in the DA's office, is that right?
Yes,
Okay. And I just got some recent texts, so bear with me. On September 19th, do you recall sending a mass text that there would be a mandatory staff meeting on Thursday, September 22nd?
very possible.
And you did not intend to be there, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Since Mark Keeney was your right-hand person, would he be the one to get everybody together, make sure they were there?
That, or I would have sent maybe a group email. I don't think I would have sent a group text because you can't ensure delivery, but I may have.
Madam Clerk, may I have the next in order? May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'll hand you what's marked as Defendant's Exhibit 11. Just ask you to take a look at it for a second.
Okay?
Having reviewed that, do you recall sending a group text to the staff on September 19th, Monday, to your staff that there would be a mandatory staff meeting on Thursday, September 22nd?
Yes.
Okay. Did you meet with Mike Grace after you sent this text
I do
with
not-
regards, I'm sorry, with regards to the meeting?
I do not believe I did, no, sir.
Okay.
I think we just spoke by phone.
And you knew he was going that day to talk to your staff, is that right?
Or that morning, yes, sir.
Do you recall talking to Mark Keeney between that point and the staff meeting?
I may have.
All right. After the staff meeting on the 22nd, did you talk to anybody about what Mike Grace said?
I may have. I don't remember.
Okay. Well, today you've testified to the jury that you believe that Mike Grace told them they could either cooperate or not cooperate. Is that right?
That's my belief.
And do you know who told you that?
Mike.
Mike Grace, okay? So after that, this is the time you're at BLET, right?
Yes?
Okay. So did you ask anybody about that meeting or interviews or anything like
I'm
that?
sure I did.
Okay. Wasn't it true that yesterday you were saying, I didn't talk to any of the staff people, I stayed away from that investigation completely?
I think what I said was that I wasn't at that meeting and didn't ask anybody about their interview.
Okay. Well, you have alleged in a couple of statements that I was asking everybody what they said. Is that right?
I don't know what statement you're referring to.
Okay. So as of today, what is your recollection of who you talked to about what staff members said to the SBI?
Oh, I'm sure I asked Keeney who's going, what interview when. Were they telling him what it was like? What was the feedback? What was the questioning?
Okay. Do you recall any specific feedback from any specific person?
I'm sure Keeney answered what he could, what he felt like telling me.
Okay. Do you recall anything Mr. Keeney told you?
Not sitting here, no, sir.
All right. Come back to that. Thursday, September 22nd. What day of the week would September 27th be? Do you recall sending a text on September 27th to Mr. Keeney about the interviews?
I may have.
All right, who is Shireen?
She was one of the assistant DAs.
All right, what's Shireen's last name?
Wayne.
Okay, Shireen Wayne. Do you recall exchanging a text with Mr. Keeney about Shireen Wayne's comments to other staff members about the interviews?
I may have.
Isn't it true that, well, let me ask you this question first. Who's Kyle?
Ambrose.
Kyle Ambrose. So Kyle Ambrose is the one going with you to BLET, is that right?
Yes, sir.
So around 8 o'clock in the morning on a weekday in September, you would be with Mr. Ambrose at BLET, wouldn't you?
Correct.
All right. So isn't it true that you sent a text to Mark Keeney, your right-hand man, saying that, hey, Kyle just told me that Shireen is telling folks, at least Ann, that they had to go meet with Whitley. You remember saying that?
Probably.
And then WTF, question mark, question mark, question mark. What would that stand for in a text that you sent?
WTF?
Yes.
What the fuck?
Okay. And then is it true that you further said you may need to reiterate to folks individually that as Mike Grace stated, quote, you are free to go and meet and free not to go. It is your choice. Is that correct?
If that's what that text says, yes.
All right. And isn't it true you further said that is what Mike said? Why is Shireen misstating this to people?
If that's what the text says, that's what I wrote.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Name was been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 12. Do you recognize that? And can you confirm that that is your text message to Mark Keeney?
I can't confirm it's my text. I mean, I sure don't disagree that I sent it, but there's no phone numbers or anything on there that says it's mine. But I'm not saying it's not.
Okay. And this is the same Mark Keeney that we talked about yesterday that you would have confided in about the financial issues with your wife and about potential divorce and things like that. And in the previous conversations with Mr. Keeney, he's also the same person that the issue of Spencer Morrow came up. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Spencer Morrow had taken courses and that the allegation from Mr. Keeney in the statement that you said he needed to keep his effing mouth shut, and you denied that. Is that right?
Well, I never testified that Mr. Morrow took courses. I told you he assisted Cindy with a placement type exam. And yes, I told you I had no recollection of telling Keeney that.
All right. When you were at BLET and these interviews started, would you have reached out to Mr. Keeney on a daily basis to see how things were going first with court operations?
Probably.
All right. And in addition to that, would you be reaching out about the investigation?
I'm sure I was curious about it.
Okay. September 27th, at that point, you'd already talked with Mr. Henderson and talked with me, and you had your attorney, Mr. Grace, talk to your staff, and interviews were underway, is that correct?
As far as I recall, yes.
And in your statement affidavit, which we'll get to in a moment, you also state that there is a leak in your office to the Greensboro News and Record because every time there's an interview, a reporter is there from Greensboro News and Record. Do you remember saying that?
I do.
Okay. Now, the question is, what would be your source of information if you're at BLET that you would make the statement that every time there's an interview, the reporter's there, so there's a leak in your office?
What do you mean? What would be my source of
Did
information?
somebody tell you that? Did you see it?
Well, no, I didn't see. Keeney told me.
Okay, Mr. Keeney, the same one that is referred to in this text?
Yes, sir.
All right. Did you ever get any feedback from Mr. Keeney whether or not he went and clarified Mr. Grace's directions that they could go or could not go?
I may have, I don't recall.
Okay. Did you ever text him? Well, let me ask you this. While you're at BLET, was text your main way of communicating with Mr. Keeney?
That and email.
All right. Now, as things are going on, as the interviews progress, how do you find out when somebody's going to be out the next day? Like, is there a board, or or they send you a message at the end of the day?
You mean, when you say out, you mean not,
Well, jump to it. Text to Keeney asking, where were you today and why is Ramey out tomorrow? So what would be your source of information that Keeney was out of the office that day and Ramey's going to be out tomorrow?
I guess, someone else in the office?
Okay. In fact, did you routinely do that? Check and see whether or not, where are these people?
Well, I knew that I started to see a pattern, or was told by some of my support staff that there was a pattern developing between Mr. Keeney taking time off and another assistant DA, Jill Cairo, taking time off, and that maybe that was a little bit more than just the two of them taking time off coincidentally. Mr. Ramey had taken quite a bit of time off when his mother passed and was taking time off because he had a son who had a special medical condition. So I can't tell you why I asked that specific day why Ramey was out. It could have been over concern of his son. I don't know when, I forget when his mother passed. But it wasn't unusual to find out why people were out.
So it is true that during the course of the SBI interviews, you did take an interest in who was interviewed, the presence of the press, and how that was going. Is that correct?
Well, I think Keeney and I were dialoguing. I remember he told me that the media was there. I think Shireen Wayne was one of the first people interviewed at the library in Reesville. And I think she told Keeney that the media was there. And I probably asked him, well, how would they know if nobody knows when they're setting up these appointments? And I think he told me that Shireen sent out an email where people could sign up to go meet with Agent Whitley, stuff like that.
But you didn't go tell your office yourself you need to cooperate and meet with the SBI?
Asking me that, I keep telling you no.
Okay. You relied on Mike Grace and Mr. Keeney, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Want to ask you specifically, before we leave Mr. Keeney, he had been with you from the beginning, hadn't he,
Beginning of what?
of your administration?
Yes.
All right. And he had told you early on when the transfer of employees that he didn't think it was a good idea, didn't he?
I don't recall that at all.
All right. Isn't it true that he told you that he...
Sustained.
All right, I'll ask a different way. Do you recall talking to Mr. Keeney about Cindy Blitzer working in the Rockingham office?
Oh, I'm sure at some point.
All right.
I probably discussed all the employees with him.
And isn't it true that based on your conversation, he expressed,
Objection.
I'll rephrase you, I'll withdraw.
All right.
Was Cindy Blitzer coming regularly to the office before the transfer?
Yes,
And was she coming regularly to the office after the transfer?
for the most part, yes.
And as of the end of April, early May, would you say that continued
What year?
of the first year, 2015?
Yes.
All right. And isn't it true that during the June and July months of 2015, that you approved Pam working in Person County on discovery?
I do not believe that occurred. I think Pam had the ability to come and go as she needed, like all my other employees.
All right. And so you do dispute that I'd signed Cindy there to also do Rockingham County work, is that right?
Cindy was not doing Rockingham County work.
Okay. You also dispute that when Mr. Henderson came to talk to you and you and I spoke, that I asked you to confirm that Cindy was in fact working, don't you?
Now you're in 16, March of 16?
No, I'm talking to you about when Mr. Henderson came and you and I spoke initially about the investigation.
What time frame? I'm sorry.
In September, you said you don't recall the date, but I think we've
September
established
16?
after September 6th, when you met with Mr. Henderson.
Okay. Ask me the question again, I'm sorry.
Yes. You dispute the fact that I asked you to confirm.
All right. I need a little bit more of that question before.
Yes, sir. I'll rephrase. Isn't it true that during that conversation it was discussed where you confirmed that Cindy was working or being available at work at the office to me?
I don't recall us having that conversation.
Okay. All right. But you do recall talking to Mark Keeney's father, don't you? Who's a magistrate?
Yes.
All right. And after his conversation, would you agree that he did not feel like that this was a good idea either?
Sustained.
All right. Did you get any advice from his father?
Legal advice?
Yes.
No, he's not a lawyer in North Carolina,
Right. He's a magistrate. Is that correct?
in Connecticut.
All right. Have you reviewed Mr. Keeney's statement?
Only what you showed me yesterday.
Did you recall Keeney ever sharing with you about any other information about an ongoing SBI investigation?
Oh, I'm sure we talked to him more about other than what you and I have discussed.
Well, we just discussed with the jury that you had information in December, and then maybe from a lawyer in the summer, and then in September. Do you recall telling Mr. Keeney that you had another person tell you that the SBI investigation was underway in June of 2016?
I probably was referring to that lawyer.
All right. Isn't it true that you said that you were approached in the parking lot and given information about an SBI investigation in June of 2016?
That would be the lawyer.
All right. And based on that information in June, is that what led you to go see Mr. Grace in June of 2016?
I think I had seen Mr. Grace before that.
All right. So what did make you go see Mr. Grace in June then?
I think it was just the time that I had to go see him.
Wasn't anything particular that happened that made you say, I need to go check and see if...
My recollection is I saw Mr. Grace after I met the local lawyer in the parking lot. It could have been the other way around. I
Okay.
just don't remember.
So at any point, did you call me after you spoke with Mr. Grace or this lawyer in June of 2016?
Not that I recall, no.
In fact, the last time you recalled yesterday was the Oprah Coke conversation, is that right?
No, we had our March of 2016 meeting.
Shockley.
Yes, sir.
Ocracoke would have been after the Shockley meeting?
Yes, sir.
All right. First or second week in April?
Ocracoke?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then the June meeting, getting the information, meeting with Mr. Grace, you did not call me, is that correct?
I don't believe I did, no, sir.
Well, what was the information in June 2016?
From the
What's-
lawyer?
Right, I asked you about the initial complaint, and it apparently involved both wives. When you got information in June, what was the alleged complaint?
Same thing.
That Cindy was working, or getting a paycheck without working?
Cindy and Pam, that they were looking into whether the wives showed up and worked.
Okay. And we've established Pam wasn't working, but Cindy was. Is that correct?
I don't know what you mean.
All right. In any event, you did not call me and say there is a concern
No, sir,
or an ongoing investigation that you've learned of.
I did not.
All right. Secret Service training in Alabama,
Mm-hmm.
computer forensic course. You took that, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you were aware that I had taken 2 or 3 down there as well.
Yes, sir.
Do you remember what month and year that you went?
I did the first one October 15 because I missed the DA's conference, and the second, the cellular one, I want to think it sometime in 16. I guess would say the early part of 16. I don't remember exactly when.
Okay. So sometime in 2016.
Well, the first one was you had to do the first one, and I know I did that in October 15 because, like I said, I missed the first DA's conference, so the next one had to be in 16.
Okay. All right. We'll come back to that. You said yesterday that your attorneys talked with the civil lawyers on the lawsuit that was pending at some point during the spring of 2017. Is that correct?
Well, I would guess, since we had a meeting, yes, sir.
Okay. Based on your personal knowledge, when do you think, or if you know, your attorneys that were representing you both criminally and civilly would have met with, let's first say, the civil lawyers in the case?
I have no personal knowledge that they met as opposed to phone or email, and I have no idea when.
Okay. March, April?
I have no idea. I was not there.
All right. Well, you know Mr. Grace represented you, and you know a lawsuit was filed in February. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay. And I had you identify an affidavit yesterday. Is that correct?
yes,
Your Honor, if the state will allow, I'll just go ahead and move that into evidence and ask to publish this.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right. If you'll hand it to the bailiff.
I think this is exactly
It's fine.
And what number do you have this identified as?
I'll have to check, Your Honor.
Is it,
Number
is it previously identified as number 10?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, very good. Do you have a copy for the witness as well?
I do. May I approach?
The original? Yes, please.
I do with the. Now, yesterday, Mr. Blitzer, you would have described that you first met with the SBI and gave a statement in May of 2017. Is that correct?
yes, sir.
And then you would have sat down with the civil lawyers in June of 2017, is that right?
Correct?
And given a statement.
While I discussed what we've been discussing, they took notes.
All right?
I didn't sign a statement then, if that's what you mean.
So in June, you would not have seen a final affidavit of it typed out and what you said.
No, sir.
Okay, just given notes. And then July 17th, you would have entered the plea to a misdemeanor with the condition of cooperating in the criminal case, state bar, and the civil case. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, at that point, can you tell the jury, when did you get the plea offer?
Before July 17th.
Yes?
I can't give you an exact date. Obviously, it was before the plea. I can't, sometime in June, I guess.
Well,
I think
yesterday, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think it was emailed to me, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, yesterday, kind of interrupted your answer when I was talking to you about the search warrant occurred right before you resigned,
Mhm.
and you made a comment, that's not why I resigned.
Correct?
All right, could you tell the jury why you would have resigned on that date after the search warrant was served?
My attorneys indicated, based on some communication with the district attorney here, that I owed some sort of duty to the public, that the legal profession, that the prosecutor's office not be tainted with wrongdoing or misconduct. Whether it was true or not, the allegations themselves could have hurt public's perception of the justice system and the criminal justice system, and that candidly, we didn't need to, it was possible for somebody to file a petition to ask a judge to remove the district attorney. So we certainly didn't need that publicity, and their statements to me about preserving the profession and integrity of the office were logical and made sense, so I resigned after those conversations.
In March of 2017, your attorneys are already in discussions with Ms. Freeman's office here in Wake County, is that right?
As they related it to me, yes, sir.
Okay. So February of 2017, the lawsuit's filed. By March of 2017, your attorneys are talking with the DA's office here. So do you know when your same attorneys are talking with the civil case?
I do not.
Okay. Did your attorneys direct you to go to the civil lawyers to give a statement?
We met at my attorney's office.
All right. And what was the understanding when you gave that statement?
Tell them what happened.
Okay. So it was not to obtain a dismissal or anything like that, because you didn't feel like you had any liability, did you?
I did not.
Okay. And so after giving that statement, do you know how the condition of you cooperating in the civil case became part of your plea offer in the criminal case?
No idea.
As a prosecutor, did you ever require that as a plea deal?
Sustained.
Had you, how many years of practice did you have?
22?
22 years? 22 years of practice, have you ever seen a plea deal that required?
Sustained.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Approach the witness.
No, Your Honor.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Bradsher.
You have reviewed your affidavit, haven't
Just what we discussed yesterday.
you? Okay. You have not compared it to your statement to the SBI, have you? Because you haven't been given a copy of that.
Correct.
Is that correct? All right. If you could look at page 3.
Okay.
You see in paragraph 8 where it talks about during the course of Cindy's nursing program?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I wanted to clarify that for the jury. What exactly was the nursing program that Ms. Blitzer was in 2015 or 2016?
Looking at this paragraph, I believe what this is referencing was the class that Mr. Ambrose assisted Cindy with as a prerequisite to get into South University.
All right. And that program at South was to obtain what?
A Bachelor's of Science in Nursing.
So it was a BSN program.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then you put in there that you had asked a non-lawyer assistant to help finish Cindy's work. Is that right?
No, that's not what that says.
Okay.
A non-lawyer staff member to assist in completing coursework for Cindy.
All right. Paragraph 9, in the affidavit that you gave the civil lawyers, isn't it true that you said when Cindy began reporting late to work in District 9A, Mr. Bradsher specifically told her, "You focus on your studies and I'll take care of the timesheets"?
That's what I wrote.
Okay,
That's what I
that-
said.
All right. Do you recall saying that before now in your testimony before this jury?
You didn't ask me about it. I don't. What's your question?
So even when she first started, your allegation is that I said, "I'll take care of the timesheets"?
Yes. You were her boss.
When was that said?
I don't remember the time frame.
Not even the beginning, the middle, the end?
Well, when Cindy began reporting late to work in District 9A, so I would have to assume it was sometime before she came back to Rockingham. So I'm guessing this is because she was taking my son to school, getting to 9A late. So that would have been the early part of 15.
So that statement was made to you or to Cindy, or did somebody tell you that?
Well, the way it's written, it reads as though you told me, and I related it to Cindy, not to worry about being late.
Well, this is a sworn affidavit, isn't it?
Yes,
Okay, and doesn't the language say that Mr. Bradsher specifically told her, and then it's got quotes? So I guess my question is, how do you recall that? Where was it? It must have been with Cindy there because it says, "I told her."
it was probably when you and I had a conversation about Cindy spending so much money in gas and taking so much time, as I just stated, to go take my son to school in one direction and go back to Caswell. So you and I had a conversation about her working back in Rockingham County,
So it was just you and me.
I guess.
And you don't recall where we were or when it was?
I'm sure it was by phone.
Okay. So if it's just you and me over the phone, why do you sign an affidavit saying that I specifically told her, "You focus on your studies and I'll take care of the timesheets"?
Maybe you did tell her as well. I don't know.
Did you have any timesheets in your office?
I didn't have time sheets.
All right. Did you ever take care of any approval of Beacon?
I did not know.
Okay. And then you indicate in your affidavit that, again, I told her that another one of my employees, Tyler Henderson, had been enrolled in law school while receiving paychecks for full-time work in District 9A. Do you remember?
No, the affidavit says that Mrs. Bradsher told her, not
Okay.
you.
So this is your affidavit, right? I'll make sure. Okay. In your affidavit, so were you present when Mrs. Bradsher said to her that Tyler Henderson had been enrolled in law school while receiving paychecks for full-time work?
No, I was not present.
Okay. So this affidavit under oath, is it based on something she told you?
This is based on Cindy telling me that your wife told her that.
Do you know whether that's true or not?
My wife told me she said it.
Well, isn't it true that one of the first allegations that started this was that in December 2015, the allegation Tyler Henderson was working for you, enrolled in full-time law school and getting paid by you?
I never heard that allegation.
And that wasn't true, was it?
Objection, Your Honor. I think
As to his knowledge.
I think that mischaracterizes the evidence that's been presented. That's not the allegation that's been testified to.
Sustained.
Have you seen the allegation and Mr. May's report about what Jason Ramey alleged to him?
Have not.
Okay. in any event, regardless of what Jason Ramey told Mr. Mays, which we'll come to later in the trial, you had no knowledge that Tyler Henderson got a full-time paycheck while being enrolled full-time in law school, did you?
Other than what my wife told me, your wife said no.
All right. And then, on paragraph 10, you put in the affidavit that I rode with Mr. Bradsher by car to a conference. And in the true, you said, during the trip, I told Mr. Bradsher that Cindy did not have any work to do in her job, and then it says that I would take care of it. You see that?
I do?
Yesterday, this happened in the driveway in the car, getting ready to go on the trip, and then it wasn't ever mentioned again. Is that right?
Correct?
And then you indicate in the summer of 2016 that you received a text message from Mr. Henderson. And we talked about yesterday that summer to you could be through September. Is that right?
Correct?
And after our discussion today, you know that would be sometime after September 6th.
I guess.
Okay? Now, the paragraph 12, you indicate that you and I discussed the nature of the interviews. You see that part?
I do?
All right. You indicate in one conversation that I informed you that the SBI was conducting interviews. Is that the first conversation that you've referenced to this jury?
I have no I don't remember.
Okay. Well, then you put quotes, "We deserve absolute loyalty. What did you tell your staff?" Is that right? Do you remember me ever saying that?
If I said it, we had that conversation. Yes.
All right.
We had conversations about you discussing with your staff and you telling me, demanding that they tell you what the SBI was asking them.
And when did I allegedly say that?
Don't remember. It would
So-
have had to been after everything broke, so sometime after, while I was in BLET, so after the late 16, September, October of 16.
So October. So there was a second phone call. We have the Tyler Henderson, you called me after he talked to you, and then there's another call?
Well, there's those calls, but I testified that we did have conversations after the lawsuit was filed, and I don't know if this came from one of those conversations.
I see. So this loyalty from staff, and I'm pulling in here asking them, what did they say to you, and loyalty, they're terminable at will, that could have been after the lawsuit broke?
Yes.
Okay. And paragraph 13. You stated there were several conversations in which he said is believed that there was a leak and that the individual providing information to the SBI should be fired. When was that said?
I'm guessing that would be my conversation with Mr. Henderson, because he's the only other person other than you in your office that I spoke to about this.
All right, so he said that to you or I said that to you?
Well, the way I'm reading paragraph 13, I think you said that to me.
All right. Do you specifically recall when, where, general time frame that I said that to you?
It would have been either during the interviews, when the interviews first started, or after the lawsuit broke.
Or after the lawsuit broke? Okay. Now, do you know why you included this leak comment in your affidavit about Greensboro News and Record?
What are you talking about?
Yeah, I was getting ready to find it. Oh, there it is, paragraph 16.
Okay?
On paragraph 16, page 5, do you see where it says, after the phone call with Mr. Bradsher, however, the articles from the Greensboro News and Record about the SBI investigation became even more damaging for Cindy and me.
Yes, sir?
It was clear to me that a member of my staff was giving information to the News and Record because one of its reporters was showing up on the date of the SBI interviews, so the reporter must have known when they were scheduled. Now, I'd asked you that earlier about how did you know the reporter was showing up, and you said you believe you got that from other staff people or Mr. Keeney. Is that right?
Yeah, Keeney told me that Miss Wayne said that when she left or before she got there, the media was there.
Okay. So, did the civil lawyers ask you to put this in here, or is this something that you just rattled off as part of your statement?
Well, it was a lengthy interview when I had, and like I said yesterday, they were taking notes and I was responding to questions. So they drafted the ultimate affidavit, if that's what you're asking. But
Okay.
what they wrote that I said must have come out in our interview.
So you did not, you don't recall whether you were asked or whether you just offered it. Is that right?
I do not.
All right, if you go back to the bottom of page 4,
Okay?
this is where you make a statement about Mr. Grace. Is it true that it starts with, I did not share Mr. Bradsher's desire to search for and fire the leak? Is that right?
That's how it starts, yes?
And then you say, on the contrary, I instructed my lawyer, Mike Grace, to meet with my staff to reassure them that they should cooperate with the SBI and tell the truth.
Correct?
All right. But that's not what you told Mr. Grace to do, is it?
Well, sure it is.
Well, isn't it true that you have said you can either cooperate or not cooperate?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay. Isn't it true that you've testified you don't tell Mr. Grace what to say?
Well, if you're asking me the semantics of the exact legal terminology that he used versus the formal terminology that as the client, I confirmed and agree with Mr. Grace's strategy, yes, you could slice that and dice it that way if you want.
Okay. And then after that, you say Mr. Grace further informed my staff that meeting with the SBI would not affect their relationship with me. Is that right?
Correct.
And Mr. Grace held the meeting that we just talked about with regards to the text.
Correct?
Then you indicate in the last sentence of that paragraph, I was not in my office nor even at the courthouse on the day Mr. Grace met my staff.
Correct?
All right? And less than a week after that, that's when you started getting the information that one of your staff people was going around telling people they had to meet with the SBI, and you responded with this text
Correct?
that had WTF in it.
Correct.
Okay. Then you recount the two,
Page?
page 7.
Okay?
Then you recount the 2 phone calls that we talked about yesterday.
What
The-
paragraph, I'm sorry?
The first conversation would have been
What paragraph?
with regards to it looks like it may start with 18, but it doesn't really get into the specifics. Okay, let's start with 19.
Okay.
It's my understanding that on January 11th, Mr. Bradsher fired Debbie Holbrook. I did not know this at the time, however, nor did I have any role in Ms. Holbrook's termination. I wanted to ask you, was that a question or just something that you offered?
It was a Q&A, a question and answer during the interview with the civil attorneys. They would ask questions, open-ended questions, where I would volunteer information. They would ask closed-end questions. So,
All right. And I won't go through what we went through yesterday other than ask you this follow-up. You would agree the first call that I made to you, is that right?
I would agree, what?
That the first call that you reference in January after Ms. Holbrook's firing that I made to you, is that right?
I'm sorry, I don't follow you. I would agree what?
On January 13th, you would agree that there was a phone call from me to you.
Yeah, I don't know if it was exactly January 13th, but we had a phone call in January.
Okay? And you testified yesterday that was kind of out of the blue because we haven't spoken since October 24th, the day that your wife was terminated, right?
Correct?
And in that conversation, you say that I talked about Keeney and Berger's office and digital discovery and Ms. Holbrook. Is that right?
Correct?
And then 2 or 3 days later, you call back, right?
Correct?
And what was your purpose for calling back?
Same as it was when you asked me that yesterday, to get more information as to what you found out about Keeney, what the trooper told you.
And do you remember what number you called?
I have no idea.
Okay. Do you remember what you called from?
Probably my home phone.
Okay. So at that point, the civil lawsuit had not been filed, right?
Correct?
In fact, isn't it true that you had told Erica Brandon, a member of your staff, that Mike Grace had said the SBI investigation is over and nothing is going to happen to me and Cindy?
I may have.
Okay. What led you to say to a staff member along this time frame, January or early February of 2017 now, that the investigation was over and nothing was going to happen to you and Cindy?
The best I can think of is that might have been the point in time where the AG's office had received information from Judge Crosswhite, and the AG wasn't going to, information I was told they weren't going to do anything. That's all I could think of.
Okay. So at that point, you thought it's over for me and Cindy.
If we're talking about that AG thing, yeah, that's what I believe.
Did you think there was anything else pending or?
Not that I was aware of.
Okay. And so did that occur before or after this second call?
I don't know. I don't even recall the conversation you're saying I had with Ms. Brandon, but
Okay.
I'm not saying I didn't have it.
I've reviewed several of the statements from people in your office. I want to ask you this question. Is it true that in January and February of 2017, you were not even going into the office?
I wouldn't, that's not true in January and early February, but certainly the later part of February into March, that's true.
So in January and February, how often would you say you were going in?
I don't remember.
Okay. And then the lawsuit files,
Right?
and you got served with that.
I think a copy got left at the office because I remember having a conversation with somebody that serving the office wasn't actually service, but ultimately Mike Grace and them got a copy of it.
And your lawyers, both civil and criminal, started going to work. Is that right?
I guess.
And you negotiated in terms of providing the statement, and the allegations therein resulted in the dismissal of the civil case, correct?
Well, I didn't negotiate anything.
And a misdemeanor for your involvement, is that correct?
With the caveat that I didn't negotiate any of that, yes.
With the chance of getting a PJC, but yesterday you told the jury you hoped for something better. What was that?
Oh, there's another mechanism in the justice system called a conditional discharge. So the plea cuts both ways. It's an open plea, as you well know. Sentencing is in the discretion of the judge. It could be worse, it could be better. It's just open for argument.
All right. So let me wrap it up with this. I have seen repeatedly in your statements and what you've responded to me that as staff members approached you about the employment of Ms. Blitzer. Let me strike this and start over. Let me start with Mr. Keeney. Has Mr. Keeney expressed concern to you once you knew the possibility of an SBI investigation that Cindy was not working and getting paid? Why would your response be, that didn't have anything to do with me, I'm not her boss?
I don't believe that was my response.
Okay? Repeatedly, you said, well, she works at direction of the other DA's office, so I'm not responsible. Is that right?
Her responsibility for supervising her employment and complying with the Ethics Commission statute versus the impact of a criminal investigation on my wife, you're talking 2x4s and apples now.
So during the time frame you allege that she's not working, April, May, June, July, August, was she working any in September?
Say again?
Was she working any in September?
Not that I know of, no.
Right. Did you see her or ask her?
She was in school September of 17.
In fact, shortly after September 6th, you knew from Mr. Henderson there was an SBI investigation. Did you go home and tell her, hey, honey, there's an SBI investigation that alleges that you're getting a paycheck without working?
Well, I'm sure I did.
In September, is that right?
I'm sure I did.
And she would have been aware that you had Mike Grace go to your office September 22nd and tell them all that the SBI is coming in to interview you. Isn't that correct?
I'm sure I told her, probably.
All right. So you talked to her, got an attorney. Then why does she go October 6th to Melinda Richardson and say,
Objection.
enter my beacon?
Sustained.
Well, isn't it true you knew she tried to get Melinda Richardson to enter her beacon?
I can't tell you what my wife did.
On
with my-
October 6th, even after she knew there was this issue. Isn't that correct?
I don't know.
Do you know what she said to Miss Richardson when she was trying to get the beacon entered?
I don't know.
Objection.
Overruled is whether he knows what she said.
My objection would be to her trying to get the beacon entered, which has not been introduced into evidence.
All right, so it's assuming a fact, not an evidence, Ms. Bradsher.
All right. Well, let me ask it this way. But you're absolutely sure for this jury that Cindy Blitzer knew there was an investigation as to her getting a paycheck without working before October 1st, 2016?
I can't imagine how she didn't know.
But y'all needed the money, right?
We did.
In fact, I'll finish with this. I asked you about a phone call on the day of her termination, and you said may have, may not. I went back and looked at the records. Isn't it true you and I had a phone conversation on the day that she was let go?
We may have.
Isn't it true that I told you,
Objection.
Sustained.
okay, isn't it true that in that conversation, my inability to speak with her because she had a
Objection.
lawyer?
Sustained. Mr. Bradsher, you'll have an opportunity to testify if you wish.
All right. Isn't it true that I told you the reasons why?
Sustained.
After the conversation, you knew that Cindy was going to be let go. Is that right?
I probably knew before the conversation. I think Gail Peed actually called her and fired her.
And you understood the reasons why, didn't you?
Based on the letter you wrote, yes.
In fact, every time that you worked with Cindy and that you observed me work with Cindy or Jay Stoltz work with Cindy, she was pleasant and hardworking and there were no problems, right?
Correct.
And after she was let go, she was given a nice letter of reference. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So as Tyler Henderson transferred back to 9A, there weren't any hard feelings about that. Is that correct?
About the termination?
Yes.
I guess not, no.
But there was still an investigation at that point as to whether or not Cindy and Jay Stoltz, who was identified, had done something wrong. Is that right?
That for sure, and I, at that point in time, wasn't sure about anybody else, myself, yourself included, Ms. Bradsher, Mr. Henderson. But yes, at that point, certainly Cindy and Mr. Stoltz.
And then no further contact between you and me until January.
As far as I can recall, that's correct.
All right. Thank you. Nothing further.
Redirect, Mr. Latour.
Yes, Your Honor.
Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we take a brief mid-morning recess at this time, and then we'll begin on that.
Yes, Your Honor.
Members of the jury, we'll take we'll resume at 5 minutes till 12. It's just a hair short of 15 minutes. Please recall the rules and instructions. Don't talk about the case among yourselves or with anyone else. Don't form or express opinions about the outcome. No media or independent investigation into these matters, and no conversations with parties, witnesses, or lawyers. Leave your materials in your chairs and gather in the deliberation room at 5 minutes till 12. Everyone else, please remain seated.